Christmas lights sparkled around the table, but my world collapsed with one cruel sentence. "You're the most useless child we have." My parents' words sliced through me like glass, freezing the laughter midair. For years, I paid their debts, carried their burdens, while they paraded my brother as their golden son. The room held its breath, waiting for me to break. But this time, something inside me cracked open, not in weakness, but in fire. I rose, my voice steady though my hands trembled. "Then stop calling me when you need money." Silence fell, and everything began to shift. The house glowed with warm golden lights, the scent of cinnamon and roasted turkey filling the air. Laughter floated across the long dining table, punctuated by the soft clinking of crystal glasses. From the outside, we looked like the picture-perfect family, smiles polished for photographs, matching sweaters carefully chosen for the occasion, the Carter family's annual Christmas tradition. Facebook was already buzzing with posts. Another wonderful Carter Christmas. The likes and heart emojis rolled in, as if strangers behind their screens could confirm we were exactly who we pretended to be. I sat among them, my glass of wine untouched, my smile tight and practiced. But inside, I felt like an intruder, a guest in my own family's home. My brother David leaned back in his chair, his booming laugh carrying over the chatter. My parents' eyes lit up every time he spoke, as though every word from his lips was gold. He wore the same smug grin he'd perfected years ago, basking in their attention like sunlight. I looked at him and wondered how long it had been since I felt that kind of acceptance, that warmth that came without strings attached. My mother reached across the table, patting David's hand as she exclaimed, "We are so proud of you, David. Our golden boy." The words fell heavy, not just because of what they meant, but because of what they erased. I shifted in my chair, trying to breathe through the tightness in my chest. Every year, it was the same. My accomplishments carefully edited out of the family story. The fact that I had built a career, bought my own home, and paid off debts that weren't even mine never made it into the highlight reel. Instead, I was reduced to silence, my identity dissolving beneath their rehearsed narrative. I caught my father's eyes across the table, cold and assessing, the kind of look that didn't need words. It said, "Don't forget your place tonight." And in that instant, I knew this evening would not pass quietly. The conversation rolled on without me, stories of David's supposed triumphs filling the air. "Remember when you landed that big account last year?" my mother gushed. "You've always had such a gift for leadership." David smirked, swirling the wine in his glass, letting the praise linger. My chest burned. That account he bragged about? I had been the one to quietly settle the fallout when it failed, wiring money he never paid back. But here, in this curated holiday fantasy, the truth had no place. I forced a polite smile, trying to join in. "Actually, I've had some big projects this year too," I began, my voice soft but steady. For a heartbeat, the table went quiet, all eyes on me. But instead of interest, I saw something sharper in my mother's gaze, dismissal. She waved her hand with a little laugh, the kind meant to sting without leaving a mark. "Melissa, dear, you're always so busy with work. Nobody really needs to hear about that right now. Tonight is about family, not business." Her tone dripped with sweetness, but every syllable pressed against me like a blade. The laughter resumed, covering the wound, but I felt my throat tighten. To them, my work was meaningless, my sacrifices invisible. To them, my presence was more inconvenient than celebrated. I lowered my gaze to my plate, the turkey and cranberry sauce blurring before me. I told myself to stay quiet, to keep the peace. But inside, something restless stirred, a voice whispering that this silence was its own prison. As the night carried on, the charade deepened. David recounted a story about a business trip, my parents nodding proudly as if he were the very embodiment of success. I knew better. I had been the one wiring funds when his credit cards maxed out, the one shielding the family name from scandal. But none of that mattered now. My truth was swallowed whole by their collective fiction. A pause fell in the conversation when Aunt Clara, one of the few relatives not entirely enchanted by David, leaned forward. Her eyes swept the table, finally landing on me. "And what about Melissa?" she asked, her voice sharp enough to cut through the noise. "I've heard she's been doing some incredible work lately. Why hasn't anyone mentioned her?" The silence that followed was deafening. Forks froze midair. Wine glasses hovered just above lips, every gaze turning toward me with something between discomfort and disdain. My heart thudded against my ribs, and I could feel my face growing warm under the weight of their stares. My mother's lips pressed into a thin line, my father's eyes narrowing ever so slightly. In that stillness, I felt it, the tension, the warning, the storm building just beneath the surface. For the first time that night, the mask slipped. I was no longer invisible, but the air around me shifted, sharp and heavy. Something in the room told me that my silence, so carefully preserved for years, was about to shatter. The air grew heavier after Aunt Clara's question, but the moment passed as my father cleared his throat, pivoting the conversation back to David. It was as if my existence had been momentarily acknowledged only to be swiftly erased again. I sat there, forcing my fork through the mashed potatoes, my jaw tight. Their laughter picked up once more, a rhythm I was expected to harmonize with but never lead. Soon, the stories shifted. My mother leaned forward, her eyes bright, as she began recalling Melissa's funny moments. My chest clenched because I knew where this was going. "Remember the time Melissa tried to organize that fundraiser in college and it fell apart? Poor thing, she's always been a bit clumsy with those big ideas." Her voice carried through the table, and soft chuckles followed. I swallowed hard, heat rushing up my neck. That fundraiser had collapsed because my father refused to support me financially when I needed a small loan. I had worked 3 jobs to cover the loss and still walked away with nothing but exhaustion and shame. But in this retelling, it was a charming anecdote about my incompetence. I wanted to scream, but my lips pressed into silence. David smirked at me across the table, his hand casually draped over his chair. "If it weren't for this family, I don't know where Melissa would be," he said smoothly, as though delivering a compliment. "She's lucky we're here to keep her grounded. Otherwise, who knows what kind of trouble she'd get herself into." The table erupted with laughter. I laughed too, though my teeth ground together so tightly I thought they might crack. The poison spread with every word. They listed my failures like items on a menu, ignoring everything I had done to keep this family afloat. The mortgage I'd quietly paid off when my father's business went under. The hospital bills I had covered when my mother's surgery threatened to drown them in debt. The credit cards I had settled for David so his name wouldn't rot in collections. None of that was ever mentioned. None of that fit their script. Gaslighting had become their native tongue. Every time I tried to defend myself, my mother brushed it aside with a sweet smile. "Melissa, don't be so sensitive. We're just teasing you." And I would sit there, wondering if maybe I really was too sensitive. Maybe I really was the problem. Doubt crept in, insidious and suffocating. Had I made it all up? Were the years of sacrifice nothing more than the figments of a desperate mind seeking recognition? The sharp trill of my mother's phone cut through the conversation. She reached for it casually, her face illuminated by the glow of the screen. For a fleeting second, I saw the message flash across before she turned it away. "Where's the money Melissa promised this month?" My stomach dropped. It wasn't just in my head. They were counting on me, using me, and yet branding me as their failure. The laughter continued around me, but inside, something was unraveling. I sat frozen, hands folded tightly in my lap, while my family turned me into their entertainment. My father leaned back in his chair, his voice booming as he launched into another tale. "And of course, who can forget when Melissa tried to cook Thanksgiving dinner? Half the food ended up in the trash." The table roared, glasses raised in mock toasts. I lowered my gaze, remembering how that dinner had failed only because I'd been working a double shift the night before to cover David's overdue rent. Exhausted, I'd burned the turkey, but to them it was another punchline. The laughter sliced through me, each memory twisted into ridicule. My hands clenched beneath the tablecloth, nails digging into my skin as I fought to keep my composure. Every story was a reminder that in this family, I wasn't just forgotten. I was their scapegoat, the canvas on which they painted their dysfunction. I stole a glance at Aunt Clara. Her lips were pressed thin, her eyes darting between me and the others, but even she stayed silent. No one dared challenge the hierarchy here. My parents and David ruled the narrative, and I was the fool who silently played along. The noise blurred around me until all I could hear was the blood pounding in my ears. My throat ached from holding back words I wanted to hurl, words that might finally cut through the facade. But fear chained me to my chair, fear of their retaliation, fear of proving them right, fear that maybe they were right. David turned toward me, his smirk widening, his voice low enough for only me to hear. "Just wait," he murmured, leaning close, his breath brushing against my ear. "Let's see how long you can last tonight." His words weren't a threat, they were a promise. And in that moment, with the laughter still swirling around me and the weight of his cold smile pressing into my skin, I realized something undeniable. The storm wasn't coming. It was already here. The night reached its cruel crescendo when my father raised his glass. His voice boomed above the chatter, commanding the room into silence. "To family," he declared, his eyes sweeping proudly over David. Then, with a sharpness that made my stomach twist, he turned to me. "And to Melissa," he added with a laugh. "Our most useless child. Truly, we don't know what we'd do without all her mistakes." My mother laughed along, her hand resting on David's arm. "Oh, stop! You'll embarrass her." "But really," she said, her voice laced with poison disguised as humor, "he's not wrong. You're the most useless child we have, Melissa. Always trying, always failing. At least David makes us proud." The words crashed into me, louder than any explosion, sharper than any blade. The room froze, forks suspended midair, glasses trembling in stunned hands. Every eye turned toward me, some with pity, others with amusement, none with defense. I felt the air grow thick, pressing down on my chest until I could hardly breathe. For a second, I thought I might crumble right there, sink beneath the table and disappear. But I didn't. Instead, I sat frozen, my pulse hammering in my ears, my face burning under the heat of their scrutiny. This was it, the moment the mask shattered. In one brutal sentence, everything I had clung to, hope, loyalty, the dream of someday being seen, died. This was the death of innocence. My family had never loved me, not truly. I was never the golden child, never the source of pride. I was their scapegoat, their punchline, their burden. The silence stretched on. I could feel David's gaze drilling into me, his smirk daring me to react. My mother tilted her head as if waiting for me to laugh it off, to accept my role in their performance. My father leaned back in satisfaction, savoring the control. Something inside me cracked, not in weakness, but in defiance. My lungs filled with air as I drew a breath deeper than any I had taken that night. And for the first time in my life, I prepared to speak the truth. What I was about to say hung in the balance, suspended between destruction and liberation. No one at that table expected it. Not my parents, not David, not even me. The room quivered with anticipation, as though the walls themselves leaned closer. My lips parted, and the faintest tremor of words began to form. Later that night, long after the lights had dimmed and the table had emptied, I found myself in my small apartment, alone. The silence there was different. It wasn't suffocating like it had been at dinner. It was heavy, oppressive, and laced with despair. I collapsed onto the couch, still wearing the same dress, my makeup smudged from tears I could no longer hold back. The sobs came in waves, shaking me until I could barely breathe. I pressed my palms against my eyes, willing myself to disappear, to unfeel the sting of their laughter and the finality of their words. In that fragile space, I let myself break. the strong facade I had carried into every holiday, every phone call, every obligation crumbled, and I was left with nothing but raw ache. Time blurred, minutes, hours, I couldn't tell. At some point, I forced myself upright and stumbled toward my desk. I pulled open the drawer, my hands trembling as I sifted through stacks of envelopes. One by one, I laid them out across the desk. Hospital bills, mortgage payments, credit card statements. Every one of them bore my name, my account numbers, my signature. The weight of my sacrifice stared back at me, undeniable. For years, I had been the lifeline of a family that despised me, keeping them afloat while they laughed at my expense. My throat tightened and another sob escaped. I thought of every birthday gift I had skipped buying for myself, every trip I had turned down, every night I had worked late just to cover their endless needs. My life had been carved into pieces and fed to them, and still they called me useless. As I sat there, my laptop chimed with a new email notification. My heart jumped at the sound, and with a trembling hand, I clicked it open. The subject line read, Account Activity Report, David Carter. My eyes scanned the page, confusion quickly turning to horror. The transfers were all there, month after month, money wired from my accounts directly into his. Not for the reasons he had claimed, not to cover family emergencies, but to mask an enormous debt, one he had hidden for years. The blood drained from my face as the truth settled like lead in my stomach. He had been using me not just as a safety net, but as a shield, funneling my hard-earned money to keep his secret life from collapsing. The betrayal was complete. My family had crucified me for his sins, and I had paid the price. I stared at the glowing screen, the evidence undeniable, my tears drying on my cheeks. And for the first time that night, anger flickered through the despair. The email sat open on my screen, its words searing into me with every line I reread. For so long I had believed their narrative, that I was the burden, the failure, the one who couldn't measure up. But the evidence told a different story. It wasn't me who had failed. It was them. My so-called golden brother had siphoned my money for years, and my parents had stood by, complicit in the lie. They weren't my rescuers. They were parasites. For the first time in years, my despair began to twist into something hotter, sharper. Rage! It surged up from deep within me, wrapping around the shame and choking it out. I wasn't the useless one. I was the one who kept the lights on, who paid the hospital bills, who saved them from ruin while they laughed at me. Without me, they would have drowned long ago. I pressed my palms against the desk, breathing hard, feeling the fire grow. In my search for air, I stumbled onto forums late that night, places I had never dared to look before. Toxic parents, narcissistic families, scapegoat child. Words that once might have felt foreign now felt like mirrors. Each story I read echoed my own life. Parents who praised one child while destroying another, siblings who turned cruelty into a game, the endless cycle of gaslighting and blame. And in those anonymous confessions from strangers, I found something I had never been given at home. Recognition. Validation. I wasn't alone. Tears blurred my vision, but they were different now. They weren't tears of helplessness. They were tears of release. For years, I had carried the weight in silence, believing I was the problem. But reading those stories, I realized I had been trained to believe that, conditioned to keep quiet. My family's poison was systematic, designed to keep me small so they could survive off me. I reached for a notebook and pen, hands trembling as I began to write. The words spilled out raw and jagged, but they were mine. I am not their failure. I am not useless. They used me, drained me, and called it love. I carried their debts, their lies, their shame. But I will not carry their silence anymore. Line after line filled the page, a confession, a manifesto, a promise. By the time my hand cramped and my eyes ached, the page screamed with determination. On the final line, I wrote, my handwriting steady despite the tremors in my chest. At the next gathering, I will not stay silent. I set the pen down, staring at those words. They terrified me and freed me all at once. For the first time, I could imagine a future where I didn't just endure, but fought back. The next day, the fire inside me demanded action. I opened my laptop again, pulling up bank records, email trails, text messages. One by one, I organized the receipts of my family's hypocrisy, wire transfers to David, screenshots of my parents begging for money under the guise of emergencies. So, a voicemail of my father's voice, sharp and cruel, telling me I was worthless while asking for a check. Each piece was a weapon, each file a shield against the lies they had crafted around me. I compiled everything into folders, labeling them with precision. Financial proof, messages, audio. For the first time, I wasn't their scapegoat. I was their reckoning, but it wasn't enough. Somewhere deep down, I knew the truth had to be bigger, louder, and that's when the knock came. I opened the door to find Aunt Clara standing there, her eyes heavy with something more than pity. She stepped inside, clutching a worn folder to her chest. "Melissa," she said softly, "there's something you need to see." She laid the folder on my desk and slid it open. Inside were yellowed papers, old letters, and a handful of documents stamped with my father's name. As I flipped through them, my breath caught. They revealed a history I had never known. David's golden boy reputation wasn't spotless. Years ago, he had made a mistake so disastrous it could have ruined the entire family. But instead of holding him accountable, my parents had covered it up. They had used money, my money, funneled through lies, to bury the scandal. My chest tightened as I read line after line, piecing together the story they had hidden for years. Every sacrifice I had made had not just supported them, it had protected David's carefully manufactured image, and they had let me carry that burden in silence while branding me the failure. I looked up at Clara, my hands trembling with the weight of the truth. She met my eyes and gave a small, sad nod. "I was the scapegoat before you," she whispered. "When I stopped playing the role, they cast me out. Don't let them do the same to you. End it." Her words burned into me, a final spark igniting the fire already raging inside. I closed the folder and pressed it to my chest, my jaw set. The rage wasn't just mine anymore. It was the rage of every scapegoat, every silenced voice in this family. I whispered to myself, my voice steady, my heart pounding. This ends now. The next family gathering came faster than I had expected. The decorations were the same. The food smelled the same. The laughter sounded the same, but I wasn't the same. I walked into the room carrying not just my body, but my resolve. My parents greeted me with forced smiles, brittle and sharp, as though they could sense the shift in me. David smirked, his confidence radiating as always, as if daring me to challenge his throne. Dinner began like a rehearsed play. My father toasted David once more, praising him for his successes. My mother chimed in, recounting his charm and brilliance. And then, as if on cue, she turned to me with that familiar saccharine tone. "Melissa, still chasing work, I suppose? You've always been too busy for family. Not that it's ever led you anywhere." Her words landed like stones, but this time I didn't swallow them. I rose slowly, the chair scraping against the floor with a sound that silenced the entire table. My hands trembled, but my voice came steady, clear, resonant with a strength I had never allowed myself before. "If I'm useless," I said, each word cutting through the still air, "then stop calling me when you need money." The silence was immediate and absolute. Faces froze, forks hovered midair, and then, like glass shattering, chaos erupted. Gasps filled the room. Some covered their mouths, others shifted uncomfortably. My parents' faces drained of color. My mother stammered, "Melissa, what are you—" But the words died as the weight of truth pressed down. From the corner of the room, a cousin held up a phone. The red light of recording blinked, unnoticed until that moment. Within minutes, the clip was online, posted to TikTok with a caption that cut through the Carter family's facade. "When the scapegoat finally fights back." The video spread like wildfire. Notifications buzzed, phones vibrated, whispers spread across the room. People outside our family bubble were watching, sharing, commenting. The Carter family's carefully constructed image of perfection began to fracture under the harsh light of reality. David leapt to his feet, eyes wild. "Turn that off!" he shouted, lunging toward the cousin holding the phone. His face twisted with panic, not fury. But before he could snatch it, Aunt Clara's voice sliced through the air. "Enough!" she roared, rising with an authority none of us had ever seen her use. Her hand slammed against the table, rattling the glasses. The room fell silent once more. The old order crumbled in that instant. Clara's words cut deeper than any I could have spoken. "I watched you all tear her apart year after year," she said, her voice trembling with long-buried rage. "I was your scapegoat once too, and I won't let you do it again." Her eyes burned as they swept across my parents, then David. I pulled the folder from my bag, my hands no longer shaking. "You want proof?" I asked, my voice steady. One by one, I spread the documents across the table, bank statements, text messages, emails, the audio file of my father's venomous voicemail, every piece a nail in the coffin of their lies. The silence was deafening as my relatives leaned in to read. Shock rippled across their faces as the truth unfolded. The money I had given, the debts I had covered, the abuse I had endured, and then came the final blow. Aunt Clara stepping forward with the hidden history of David's past, the scandal my parents had buried with my sacrifices. My father sputtered, his face pale. "This is nonsense, fabricated." My mother shook her head wildly. "She's twisting it. She's always been dramatic." But their voices cracked under the weight of undeniable evidence. The more they denied, the more desperate they sounded. David tried to speak, but his words choked in his throat. The smirk he wore like armor had vanished. The reality of his debts, his failures, his dependence on me stood naked before everyone. The golden boy's crown crumbled to dust. Voices rose around the table, not laughter this time, but murmurs of disgust, disappointment, betrayal. The family that had once applauded their cruelty now recoiled. The pedestal had shattered, leaving nothing but rubble. My parents turned on each other, their unity gone. My mother hissed, "You told me she'd never say anything." My father snapped back, "You said you had it under control." Their words spiraled into blame, their image collapsing faster than they could patch it. I stood still, watching the empire they had built on lies cave in on itself. For the first time, I wasn't the one crumbling. I wasn't the one breaking. They were. And then, as if the universe had planned it, the door opened. A voice I hadn't expected cut through the chaos. "No one has the right to treat you this way." I turned. There stood Rachel, my closest friend, the one who had seen me at my lowest, the one who had held me through nights of doubt. She walked to me without hesitation, her hand reaching for mine. The touch was grounding, anchoring me amidst the storm. The family stared, but I no longer cared. Their opinions, their labels, their poison, it no longer defined me. The truth had been spoken, the mask torn away, the reckoning delivered. And as Rachel's hand tightened around mine, I realized I wasn't alone anymore. The aftermath came quickly, like a wave crashing against the fragile walls of a sandcastle. Within days, the video had reached thousands. The Carter family's reputation, once untouchable, unraveled thread by thread under the relentless gaze of strangers who saw the truth clearer than the relatives ever had. The comments poured in. Sympathy for me, outrage at my parents, ridicule for David. The perfect facade they had cultivated for decades crumbled in the court of public opinion. And for once, I didn't have to say another word. The truth was doing the work for me. I didn't stay to watch them drown in their own lies. That night, after the confrontation, I walked away from the house without looking back. The December wind cut across my face, but it felt like a baptism, cold and cleansing. My parents' voices, once a constant echo in my mind, were fading into silence. I carried no revenge in my heart, no desperate desire for their approval. The reckoning had been spoken, and that was enough. The next morning, I sat in a cafe tucked into a quiet corner of the city. Snow drifted past the window, soft flakes painting the streets white. My coffee steamed gently in my hands as I stared out at the world, not with bitterness, but with something foreign and fragile. Peace. For the first time, I wasn't rehearsing comebacks or anticipating insults. I was just there, present, whole, unburdened. I pulled out my notebook, the same one where I had scrawled my promise weeks earlier. My handwriting trembled, but this time with relief, not rage. I kept my word. I did not stay silent, and I survived it. Tears welled in my eyes, not of sorrow, but of release. The quiet moment stretched, a healing pause, until my phone buzzed against the table. I picked it up hesitantly, expecting perhaps another headline, another ripple of scandal. But it was a message from someone I hadn't heard from in years, my cousin Lydia. "I'm proud of you. Let's start again." I stared at the words, my chest tightening. Lydia had once been my closest ally before the family turned her against me. To see her reaching out now, not with judgment but with pride, felt like a hand extended across years of silence. I whispered into the empty cafe, "Maybe this is the beginning." The days that followed were different. I no longer walked with the weight of their disapproval pressing against my spine. I chose who I let in. Rachel stood firmly by my side, her support unshaken. Aunt Clara became more than just a distant relative. She became a mentor, someone who had walked the path of exile before me and survived it. Together, they formed the first threads of something I had thought impossible, a chosen family. I began sharing my story, first quietly in online forums, then louder, braver. "I am not useless," I wrote. "I was scapegoated by the people who should have loved me, but I chose to break the cycle." Messages poured in from strangers across the world. People who had been silenced, shamed, scapegoated, now found courage in my words. Each reply stitched another piece of strength into me. I was no longer telling my story for myself alone. I was telling it for every person who had been crushed by the weight of toxic love. I didn't become cold or hardened as I once feared I might. Instead, the fire within me softened into warmth. I learned to smile without forcing it, to laugh without guilt, to stand tall without apology. I discovered the power of boundaries, not as walls of anger, but as gates of self-respect. For every door I closed to the people who hurt me, I opened another to those who valued me for who I was, not what I could provide. On Christmas Eve, 1 year later, I found myself walking alone through the quiet streets dusted with snow. But I didn't feel alone. My phone buzzed with messages from my chosen family, Rachel inviting me over, Lydia sending a photo of her kids, Aunt Clara reminding me to eat. These were the voices that mattered now, not the ones that had tried to bury me. I paused under a streetlight, the snowflakes landing softly on my coat, melting against the warmth of my skin. I thought about the girl who once sat silent at that family table, desperate for scraps of approval. She was gone. In her place stood a woman who had faced the storm, spoken the truth, and walked free. I breathed in the cold night air, letting it fill me, letting it cleanse me, and then I stepped forward, not into exile, but into freedom.